So thank you all for being here. This is a very exciting moment in Freeport. So for those who do not know, my name is Joanna Benoit. I have the honor of being the chair of council here in Freeport. So today is the kickoff of the Village Corridor Initiative. This is really the culmination of everything we've been working on as a community, and this will finally be the time where we create our buildable plans for implementing our vision of downtown for guests and visitors alike that we've all been talking about for so long. We have an incredible team working on this project. We have the Freeport Town staff, we have the Maine Department of Transportation, we have our consulting engineer Stantec, and of course we have Jeff Speck. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our development director, Brett Richardson.
It's very kind of you. Thanks very much. I'm excited to be here. It's great to see the good turnout tonight. Like Joanna said, we've been working hard on this as a community for going on 10 years. And we have a great team to help us take the next step. Really happy to have a great partnership with Maine DOT. They've been very supportive. They've understood what we're trying to accomplish. They've helped us develop a strong scope of work to engage you all and move forward with the community's plans. And we've got a great team. I'm really pleased to introduce Matt Drost. Before we do that, housekeeping, bathrooms are up off to the left, and obviously help yourself there. And we're going to introduce the project team. Then we'll hear from Jeff, an inspiring talk about downtown Freeport and Main Street. And then we'll bring the team back on for a little roundtable discussion to learn more about the project, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. So with no further ado, Matt Drost, Creative Collaborative Partner from Maine DOT.
Thanks very much, Brett. This is a Village Partnership Initiative, a program that Maine DOT created a few years ago. And we're very excited about working with the town of Freeport as well, especially with a collaborative partner like Brett as well, developing a scope of work that I think had the greatest response from any RFP that I've seen a community send out in the last few years, which I think speaks a lot to the creative opportunity that exists here in Freeport. One of the respondents to that RFP obviously was Stantec with Speck Dempsey as a sub-consultant, and I'm happy to introduce Jessa Berna and Chris Schreiber from Stantec.
My mic works, yeah. I'll have to go with this mic. Oh, here we go. Hi, I'm Jason Schreiber. I'm with Stantec. I will be co-managing this project with Jessa Berna.
Hi, I'm Jessa Berna, based in Portland, working with Jason on this project.
So I'm a senior principal. I'm based out of Boston. We are a firm that tries to do lots of things, but we have a specialty that's called Urban Places. And Urban Places is a division within Stantec, a firm that does things all over the globe that really tries to help communities become really vital and get back to the roots of what really makes them successful. And it's a very exciting initiative that you're all undertaking, and we really are here to respect a lot of the past work that has happened over the last many years. It's culminated in some really great thinking in the last few, and we're going to be here to take that and package that and hopefully give you something that's buildable and executable. I'd love to answer some questions about that afterwards. We've got some information in the back of the room. When we end the talk tonight, we'll be able to maybe peruse and get some additional details on how we'll be evolving the scope of work over the next several months. But tonight is not about me. It's not about Stantec. We are partnering with Speck Dempsey. We've been working with Speck Dempsey and especially with Jeff Speck, myself, for well over a decade, if not approaching 2 decades. For those of you who may not know, Jeff Speck is an award-winning author of both Walkable City and Walkable City Rules. These are the top 2 selling urban planning books of this century and among the top 10 of the last century. There may be another one coming someday soon. I will say this much about Jeff Speck and the reason why I like working with him. It isn't what he writes. It isn't necessarily the content, which I totally agree with, and I think everybody here should really use as an educational session tonight to see the perspective. It's more about who Jeff is. Jeff is a very straightforward person. He's a wonderful character and has a great charisma, as I'm sure you'll learn. But most importantly, he has this conviction. He He has a conviction for how to make great places. And it's wonderful that you're going to hear from him and how he goes about his work and what he thinks about Freeport. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jeff Speck.
Wow, Jason, thank you. That was great. Hi, everybody. Am I on? Jason, that was so nice. Jason is, I describe Jason to everyone I know as the smartest transportation planner I've ever worked with. That was one of the best, nicest, because coming from you, Jason, hearing that from you was one of the nicest introductions I've ever had. I was reminded of the worst introduction I've ever had, which was, actually I have pictures. So I'll tell you in a minute. So we're here, it's 2025. The last time I spoke in Maine was to the MMA, the, what is it, Mixed Martial Arts? The Maine Municipal Association. And it felt like 4 years ago, but it was actually in 2018. And I missed them. There was a morning keynote, and I wasn't there. I drove up, I changed into my suit in the bathroom, and I came out as I was being introduced by the wonderful man who runs the MMA. And all I know is he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you finished your lunches, the presentation this morning was not representative of what the MMA stands for. It was not up to our standard, and we promise it will never happen again. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Speck." There was some drug use involved, and it's a longer story. Was anyone there at the MMA? And I don't really know the whole story, but I have one other, oh, that's kind of faded, but I have one other story to tell you as we start, which is you can see there's a little island called Eagle Island that's just south of Great Spruce Head, southeast of Great Spruce Head. So I'm not from here, I'm sorry. I'm not from down east, I guess you'd say I'm from up west. But I grew up in Boston. My friend's dad had a house, a little house on Eagle Island. It had a main street, as you can see, as well. It's actually called Main Road. But our Freeport story is that only one store in America sold Toblerone in 1970. And every summer we'd come up and we'd stop at LL Bean, and he'd buy the little mini Toblerones. You remember those? And then every time we went swimming, we'd get one, because the water was so cold. So that's my Freeport story, but let's get into why we're here. I'm very grateful to the town of Freeport. There's a real milestone for this talk, which is, I think this is the first project I've ever worked on, which is co-sponsored by a state DOT. And you know, usually we do projects in order to slip them by the DOT or present them to the DOT, but it's always like, okay, we've done it now, we have to show it to the DOT. We hope that they agree that they'll build it or that we can build it. In this case, the DOT is here to build it. So that's just awesome, and I have to say that gives this project so much more significance than so many others that I've worked on. So yes, my way of talking about good urban planning is through the window of the walkable city. It's not that I'm all that focused on walkability, except that I think I've learned that it's the best way to communicate good planning. So about 15 years ago, I kind of settled on this term instead of what we used to call it, which was traditional urbanism, and then the new urbanism, and then best practices in town planning. But the walkable city is a way to present it in a way that people really get it and can themselves work on it. And of course, city is a very loose term. And by the way, there are cities in Texas with 14 people in them. So don't think I'm talking about, you know, Manhattan. I know you're a town, but the same principles apply. In my book, Walkable City, I have kind of two sections. The first section is why we need to be more walkable. The economic reasons, the environmental reasons, the epidemiological reasons, why we need to make our communities more walkable. And that's the why we need it portion. I also, most of the book and most of my other books are about how to accomplish that. In terms of the why we need it, we're not doing that tonight. We don't have time to really go through it. I think if you're here, you probably are convinced that Freeport wants to be an even more walkable place. But if you're curious, I do have a 15-minute TED Talk that's a short version of that. And if you look up my name on TED, you can find this talk about why it's so important. We're going to get right into how to make it happen and what in Walkable City I call my general theory of walkability, which asks the question, how do you get people to walk? in America when driving is so easy and so cheap and so subsidized, and most people have a car that's parked there in the driveway between them and everything. How are you going to get them to make the choice to walk? Well, the walk has to be as good as the drive. And the same goes for biking, right? But if the walk or bike is going to be as good as the drive, then it has to do 4 things simultaneously. It needs to be useful, it needs to be safe, it needs to be comfortable, and it needs to be interesting. And that's the framework that I use in my book. It's the framework for most of my lectures, and that's the structure of our talk tonight. So we're going to march, no pun intended, we're going to march through each of these categories one by one. The reason to walk is a story I learned from my mentors, Andres Dwani, who you may have heard of, and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk, who kind of created this new urbanist movement. Andres used to give a talk called the Story of Planning. And he talked about how in the 19th century, people were choking on the soot from the dark satanic mills, and the planners said, hey, let's move the housing away from the factories. And they did, and lifespans increased immediately and dramatically, and the planners were hailed as heroes, and Andres used to joke that they've been trying to repeat that experience ever since. So you have the onset of single-use zoning, Euclidean zoning, the separation of the landscape into large areas of strictly single use. And this was taught in school for decade after decade after decade. It became the foundation, actually, of the planning profession in the United States. This isn't taught in school anymore. We know this is wrong. We know that if you separate retail from multifamily, from single family, from general office, from medical office, and just have one road connecting these big blobs on the landscape, that actually you're condemning your entire population to driving everywhere all the time. But even though we know it's wrong, most of the time when I land on a site to do a project, there's already a map on the site, and it looks like this. So, what is walkable? Well, this is an extreme example. And Manhattan has more subway stops than all other city subway stops in America put together, which is a big reason why it's so walkable. But what you see here is the land use map of Manhattan, and you see it's like confetti. It's very fine-grained. All the uses are mixed together, and that red color is actually vertically mixed use. So super mixed use, so it's super walkable. I was an art history major. They say that wasn't the most lucrative choice, but I tell people you don't want a Rothko. You want a Syrah. Syrah was the pointillist, right? Very fine-grained. The more fine-grained, the more walkable. This gets to the fundamental new urbanist story, the story I heard Andres give in 1989 at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and I turned my whole career from thinking I was just going to be an architect, which it's my hobby now. I'm unlicensed, and I build buildings, which it's wonderful. There's no risk. Someone else stamps them. But I thought I was going to be an architect, but I heard Andres talk, and he gave this talk that just blew me away. And actually, it became the book Suburban Nation, which is the first book I wrote with Andres and Liz. But it was the basic towns versus sprawl discussion. And even back then, he showed this picture of Newburyport, Mass. And he said, there's only 2 tested ways to make a community. There's 1,000 ways to make a city, but there's only 2 ways that we've tested by the thousands. And that is the traditional neighborhood and suburban sprawl. The traditional neighborhood is defined as being compact, diverse, and walkable. It's almost always about a half mile across, so a 5-minute walk from edge to center. You're looking at several neighborhoods of Newburyport. You see there are bigger houses and smaller houses, and places to live, factories, places to work, places to worship. There's the Main Street, if you know it. I show this all over the world, but you guys probably know Newburyport better than most. But it's all, most of your daily needs, not all of them, but most of your daily needs are within walking distance. That's the sort of diversity that generates walkability, diversity of use. Remember, we're in this first category, the useful walk. And then there's lots of streets, and they're in a nicely connected network. So no one street needs to be that big, and that makes it walkable as well. So in contrast, sprawl, the name, it's not compact. Right? It's not diverse. A whole square mile might hold just one use, as in that blob diagram I showed you, or just one house over and over again. And it's not walkable because look at these streets. Loop, cul-de-sac. Very few streets actually connect. And because so few streets connect, those streets have to bear all the traffic of the entire metropolis. As a result, they're noxious, right? They're traffic sewers. The houses turn their backs to them. There's no addresses on these streets. It's actually incredibly inefficient, right? You're 3 times as likely to be killed by a car in this environment than you are in this environment. And everyone wants their kid to grow up on a cul-de-sac, theoretically, but once you leave the cul-de-sac, you're a sitting duck. So it's not a walkable or safe environment. It's fun to break sprawl down into its constituent parts, the places where you only live, where you only work, where you only shop. Schools get bigger and bigger. Whenever you consolidate a school, it means you're making it further away from most people. So the parking lots get bigger than the schools. A lot of these images are from South Florida. This is west of Fort Lauderdale. They're very proud of their 8 baseball diamonds and 8 soccer fields. But the kid who lives in this house right across the canal actually has a 1.5-mile drive to get to the field. It's preposterous, right? But if you begin the design of a city with the presumption that everyone is driving everywhere, then these sort of outcomes are absolutely normal and expected. This is not Photoshop. The part that we did not count, this is LA, the part that we did not count when we separated everything from everything else and reconnected it only with automotive infrastructure is that our highway system basically became a, just the way to get around, a commuter path. And Frank Lloyd Wright with his Broadacre City and Le Corbusier with his Ville Radieuse, the founders of modernist planning, they did not count the cars. They didn't realize that a single-family house in suburbia generates 13 car trips per day, every house, right? So I always tell people, for many, this is the American dream, the house that has nothing but other houses around it. But if this is your dream, then get ready for the nightmare. These 2 things go side by side if you're separated from everything else you need to get at. And the amount that we have to invest, this is in Malden, I believe. Malden or Medford, Mass. I think it's Malden. The amount that we have to invest in our surface infrastructure so you never have to wait more than 1 cycle at a light. Because in an environment this banal, if you have to wait more than 1 cycle at a light, you just want to shoot yourself in the face. So it can't be allowed to happen. And so we spend so much money on this surface. Also not Photoshop. This is, Walter Kulash took this picture. But the experience of being in sprawl can be very frustrating. The data show that the longer your commute, the more likely you are to be divorced. And an epidemiologist, so we're not doing the why, but an epidemiologist gave me this slide, and he said, there was this wonderful book called Urban Sprawl and Public Health, and they said, look, and this is 20 years ago, we have the first generation of Americans expected to live shorter lives than their parents because it's normal to drive, to park, to take the escalator to the gym, to get on the treadmill to walk, right? And that's just, so driving can be a real drag, and being a pedestrian can be even worse. So the rest of this talk is about existing places like Freeport and about Freeport, but I wanted to start with this larger discussion about the creation of new places, because we're actually doing it every day. We're creating the equivalent of new cities in America every day, but we're doing it in pieces, and it's never adding up to anything. But I want to share that sprawl on the left and the traditional neighborhood on the right, it's all the same stuff. Places to live, places to work, institutional buildings, schools, but how big is it? How far apart is it? And importantly, do you have a dendritic, what's called a dendritic or branching street system with 1 collector road, or do you have a network of streets? Because the great irony of sprawl is that it was created for cars, but it's actually worse for cars. Because if you have 1 engine fire, God help you, on this collector road, your whole city shuts down for an afternoon. Meanwhile, there's 21 ways to get from the lower left to the upper right of this traditional neighborhood, which contains the same things, but like your downtown, smaller and more integrated. So that's the model that makes walkability possible. It's the model that exists in your downtown. And then when we look at downtowns in this first category, the useful walk, we ask this question: what uses or use is missing or underrepresented? And it's certainly the condition in the US more than almost any other country, particularly because we have this concept of the CBD, right, the central business district, that housing is what's missing in your downtown. Jane Jacobs observed Wall Street back in the 60s, actually around 1960. She was writing about Wall Street, and she said, Wall Street has 400,000 people coming to it every day. It does not have one great restaurant, does not have one great gym. Why? Because it's missing what she called time spread. And a great restaurant or a great gym needs a dinner crowd as well as a lunchtime crowd. So, and then she added, you can't rely on bringing people downtown, you have to put them there. In other words, all these highways that Robert Moses was building ostensibly to get people in and out of the city, was just getting people out of the city, and you really need to put the housing in the downtown. And that's what cities and towns that want to thrive now are helping to do. So here in Des Moines, where I've done some work, Mayor County managed to get from 2,500 units downtown to 10,000 in 2020, over 20 years, basically by saying if you invest in this building, if you renovate a building, if you build a new building, the taxes won't go up on it for 10 years. And then additionally, you threw in 10 more years of TIF, tax increment financing, to also support, over the next 10 years, the success of these projects. Now, your comprehensive plan that you've just completed, and congratulations on that, we look at these plans to justify the work that we do. It talks about the importance of mixed use and housing diversity, encouraging a range of housing types, including multifamily apartments and townhomes, alongside well-designed commercial spaces, et cetera. That means downtown to me, and I know that the city leadership wants to see more housing downtown, and there's a number of excellent proposals to bring more housing downtown. Similarly, your climate action plan talks about amending land use policies. Obviously, if you are going to help with the climate, you want to have fewer people driving, and a big part of that is to enable high-density development, attainable housing, and mixed-use areas. Also, the place where mixed use is, the reason I focus so much on downtowns is because that's where mixed use is possible. It's very easy, well, it may not be easy, there's some developers in the room, it may not be easy to bring housing downtown, but try bringing a shop to a suburban cul-de-sac, right? So if mixed use is the foundation of walkability, it's gonna happen in your downtown and Main Street areas. It's not gonna happen so much elsewhere. And then your new dog bone work group, which is all about implementation, comments, notes, under the current standards, a 600 square foot senior affordable studio apartment requires the same amount of land per dwelling unit as a 1,400 square foot 3-bedroom unit. So like many cities, you need to amend your codes to allow the sort of housing that would allow your downtown to become more lively more quickly. And that's in the context of the housing crisis that this whole country is experiencing. It's hit you harder than most. So your average home sale price in 2014 was $381,000, and now it's $790,000. So the barriers to entry are huge, and the idea of making more housing where not only do you not have to pay as much for the unit because it's smaller and it's integrated in an apartment building, but also maybe you don't have to buy a car, or at least you don't have to buy one car per adult because you're located in an area where you can walk to stuff. And that's the real lesson of affordability, because people are paying as much for transportation as they are for housing these days in more challenged neighborhoods. So finally, not finally, but next in this category of the useful walk, we do have to talk about parking, which in most downtowns is underpriced and overrepresented. Donald Shoup, who's heard of Donald Shoup? A lot of you. He passed away this year. He was a wonderful mentor and teacher. He was the Dean of American Parking. He wrote this amazing book called The High Cost of Free Parking, which is currently changing the practices, has changed the practices in many American cities. And he asked this question, which is, when we are trying to satisfy, when we're talking about parking in our communities, we're asking the wrong question. And the question that we are asking is, how can we have enough parking? And that does not lead to successful places. The question that you need to ask, if you're thinking practically about it, is how can we provide, design, and manage parking so that cities thrive? And that adds up to a three-legged stool that he came up with, which has been tested for decades now. So far, he's been right about everything. And I should say, if you're reluctant about any of these things, you're not the only one. I was in Westport, Connecticut. You guys know Westport? And no, I was in Norwalk. I did a Norwalkability study. I was in Norwalk, Connecticut. And the day I arrived, I guess Donald Shoup had spoken like a week before, and there were flyers in all the businesses And the flyers said, Donald Shoup's theories are right, just not here in Norwalk. I thought was pretty funny. But the three-legged stool basically is, one, eliminate the on-site parking requirement. Yes, there needs to be parking. It's better to have on-site parking. It's better to have parking not on-site. It's better to have it consolidated in lots, like you often do, so that parking becomes an anchor in your downtown. But the main point he makes is that the market will take care of it, and you have no role as a city, particularly if you're interested in downtown vitality, if you're interested in fighting climate change, you have no role pursuing rules that what he calls, the on-site parking requirement, he calls it a fertility drug for cars. It really works that way. And your role as a city is not to play, you should not be playing that role. So he says, let the market do it. He tells the story of this low income, lowest of income housing that was built in Palo Alto, California. They managed to fight the existing requirement. They got it down to 2 cars for every 3 units, and that added 38% to the cost of this building. And of course, that happens all over the place. Your climate action plan says, the other thing on this chart, amend the town zoning ordinance to revisit minimum parking requirements, establish maximum parking requirements, and of course, integrate bicycle parking and trees into the parking requirements. Many cities, I forgot to put the slides in, but there's something called PRN, the Parking Reform Network, that is keeping track, prn.org, I believe, keeping track of all the cities that are just eliminating their minimums. And if you're like a lefty city, you kind of have to do it now. I don't know if you're a lefty city. But like Seattle and Baltimore and all these cities are eliminating or vastly reducing Minneapolis, understanding that the market will provide. The Freeport Downtown Vision Plan identified, I just wanted you to see, everything in gray here is parking. You have a lot of parking. It's actually quite well located, back, mostly off the main street. You're already doing a lot of things right, and this is one of them. But chances are, if this system is managed properly, you probably don't need too much more. 2, price parking in line with its value. Another way to describe this is just let the free market work. And so I want to show you the plan. One of the first, this is an update from '07, but this is probably one of the first downtown parking plans that acknowledges that people want to park. In Redwood City, California, people want to park mostly on Broadway, so that's the highest price. And then these cross streets are the next highest price. Then the surrounding streets are cheaper, and the decks are free, because we want people to park in the least convenient place if they have the least money, because the people with the most money will spend it to park and spend it to shop. And people forget, and merchants often forget, that it was merchants who invented the parking meter to make more money, to get that churn at the curb. And I was kind of surprised to see, I do not know a main street, and bear in mind I'm a little ignorant, so they could exist, but I do not know a main street as nice as yours that has free parking on it. And the charging for parking, it's not a revenue generator. It's not, I mean, it is. You'll generate a lot of revenue. But the reason to do it is to have that one open space on each block that is available for the big spender. I always say Daddy Warbucks should be able to find a spot near the Furrier, right? But Donald Shoup talks about a 15% vacancy that you get by charging the right price. We generally recommend in cities, and this is not part of our project, but because I'm here to talk about the walkable city in general, I just want to share with you that we recommend in other places that you charge enough for parking to get those open spaces in the most attractive locations. And of course, you have the garages located peripherally, or decks located, or surface lots as well, which is a good place to start. And then finally, because the merchants do not like charging for parking and generally fight it, he invented something called the Parking Benefits District. Your meter money makes a difference in Old Pasadena. They take all the extra money they get from the meters and they spend it on sidewalks and trees and storefront improvement grants and rear alleys, and so actually they benefit locally from that charge. So just FYI, that is the understood best practice in a very short nutshell. And then finally, the third and final part of the useful walk is transit. And transit connections that enable people to not own a car or own one fewer car, whether it's train or the bus stops we noticed and the buses that went by. That is part of the equation. I didn't want to neglect to mention it because you have transit, you have a train right next to downtown. We'd love to see the Portland station moved and the line become more effective, and we hope that happens before too long. All right, that's the useful walk. The second category, the safe walk, is where we're going to spend most of our time tonight. It's where we spend most of our time as designers. Certainly Stantec with their engineering expertise and all the projects that Jason and his team and I have worked on, many of them have just been about safety. They haven't dealt with the other categories at all. But there's so much we need to do about pedestrian safety. We are experiencing, you're probably aware, a pedestrian death epidemic, traffic violence epidemic in the US. You're 78% more likely to be killed as a pedestrian than you were 15 years ago. It's for a number of reasons. Angie Schmidt covers them in her book, Right of Way. The two main reasons, second is that what we call the suburbanization of poverty. That poor people who don't own cars are now living in this sprawl landscape that was designed around the idea that everyone would own a car. So if you're stuck out here without a car, you are a sitting duck, right? But the main reason is the car bloat. And by the way, they have cell phones in Europe, right? They have cell phones in Europe, and the rates have been plummeting in Europe. It's not about that as much as it is just the fact that this is our car fleet. And the typical car has gone from being a sedan to being a light truck or an SUV. And I'm not saying you should feel bad if you have an SUV, but I do know that when I read Angie's book, I sold my SUV and I bought a wagon because I couldn't be the one to hit someone with my car. So what can we do about that? We can't do much in the short term about where poor people are living. We can't do much about the size of cars, although we're trying ineffectively. But what we can do is impact the speeds at which people are driving. Who's heard of Vision Zero? Good number of you. Vision Zero is the European approach to traffic safety. It's the approach that works. It's the approach that has been lowering pedestrian deaths in Europe consistently over the last couple decades. The goal is 0 pedestrian deaths in your city or town every year. Certain cities, big cities like Oslo and Helsinki have actually pulled it off. Jersey City and Hoboken have pulled it off, looking at design. And what distinguishes Vision Zero from the traditional American approach, dare I say the DOT approach, is that it believes, well, it knows that safety comes from actually not providing forgiveness. The history of transportation planning, I should say, the history of traffic, of road design in the US is that it grew out of highway design. And the first road engineers or street engineers were highway engineers. In fact, the manual that most of them use, AASHTO, American Association of Highway Transportation Officials, has highway in the title, and everything in there is correct if you're designing a highway. Because in a highway, how do you set your speed when you get on the highway? If you're me, you look for the speed limit sign, you set your cruise control for 9 miles an hour over the speed limit sign. But the speed limit sign is determining your speed. And for that reason, since your speed is a constant, anything you can do to add forgiveness makes the highway safer. Wider lanes, more lanes, clear zones, shoulders, no trees, no intersections, loose curves, all these things, one-way travel, right? That all makes sense if you're designing highways. It does not make sense when you're designing communities. Because think about how you set your speed when you're in a town, when you're on Main Street here. You look around and you drive the speed at which you feel comfortable, or not dangerous to others, or not endangering yourself. And because of that, it's actually this Vision Zero approach of eliminating elbow room, tightening things up, making you feel unsafe speeding. That's the goal. Because speed is the principal determinant of pedestrian or driver injury in a crash. A car going 35 miles an hour is 7 times as likely to kill you as a car going 25 miles an hour. And that's the speed range we're seeing, right, on your Main Street, maybe from 0 when you're in a queue, but mostly, between 15 and 35 miles an hour. Every mile per hour counts. So what are the factors now? We're going to march through these. What are the factors that determine how fast drivers are going? The first one is the number of lanes. This is Oklahoma City, where I was called in because they suspected that maybe they had more lanes than they needed in their downtown. But this applies to, well, we'll skip that one. This is Salt Lake City, where I've also done some work, where they give you flags to wave when you cross the street because, the typical street has 5 or 6 lanes in it. I thought this was pretty rich until I discovered Granville Island in Vancouver. Have you guys seen this, the Grab a Brick program? So they put these bricks by the side of the street, you wave it, establish eye contact, make sure you're seen. But the thing is, this is Canada. These are Canadians, so they're very nice. It's actually it's a foam brick. I'm sorry to say. But anyway, in Oklahoma City, the mayor called me in 15 years ago because Prevention Magazine, in their Best Walking Cities issue, said that they were the worst city for pedestrians in the entire country. And he said, what do we do? And I said, let's do a walkability study. And he said, what's that? And I said, I don't know. Let's figure it out together. And we looked at the car counts in the downtown. And this is what we in Stantec and your DOT do. You know, when they're looking at how big a street should be, you look at the car counts. Oklahoma City was an extreme example. I can tell you though, every city, every town has some streets that have more lanes than they need. In Oklahoma City or anywhere, we know that a 2-lane street without turn lanes, can handle 10,000 cars per day. That's something engineers don't disagree on. We looked at the car counts downtown. These were all 4 to 6 lane streets in the downtown with 2-lane to maximum 3-lane demand. So this, 6-laner could have been 2 lanes. As we completed that study, Devon Energy decided to invest in this 51-story tower in the downtown. It generated $200 million in tax increment. And they said, how do we spend that money on the same day that we handed in our plan? And so they decided basically to rebuild 40 blocks of downtown streets from building face to building face. My job was the curb to curb of these streets. And I was able to remove 1/3 of the driving lanes, double the amount of on-street parking, which we'll talk about how positive that is, and add a bike network in that extra space that we gained. So a typical street went from 3-lane one-way to 2-lane two-way, 4-lane one-way, 2-lane two-way with tram in it. This street became that street. I always tell cities, this is what you do when you have money, right? They had $200 million to spend. But some cities don't have money, and we say, don't rebuild, restripe. You can restripe a whole downtown for the cost of rebuilding just a few blocks of a street. In this case, with this project we're working on here, we're looking at probably both. We're looking at hopefully restriping in the short term, so we can test, demonstrate, and enjoy the safety benefits of having these changes quickly. But because it's a state DOT project and because there are federal dollars available and state dollars available, I believe, there will be, the intention is to rebuild as well. And we can talk more about that. But what I've noticed in many places is that engineers tend to put in left turn lanes in anticipation of traffic. So this is in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. These were once alive stores because they had parking on the curb. Now there's no parking because they added this left turn lane that goes to a street with 7 houses on it. But the left turn lane that's not necessary, and potentially, and right turn lanes that aren't necessary, is what we may have, is what we may discover. And we haven't done, we haven't looked very closely. But we believe, our instincts tell us that some of your right turn lanes, some of your left turn lanes may not be needed. This left turn lane, I want you to see something. See that white spot? They knew we were in town. They repainted it today. So this is this morning, and this is this afternoon. In any case, both this island and this right turn lane, and by the way, left turn lanes really add capacity. They add a lot of capacity, and they add some danger. Right turn lanes add a little bit of capacity and add a lot of danger. So we generally don't advocate for right turn lanes. You can see how there's a lot of extra space in this intersection. Maybe these 2 lanes also aren't needed. And actually, I was going to draw this until I found it in the downtown vision plan that you guys recently completed. But this is pretty much exactly what I would have drawn. Russ Preston's team, who did that plan at Principal, is a firm I very much admire. And this shows a tactical solution, a temporary solution. But the ultimate rebuild of this street could make a really special spot here in what I feel is your heart. It's where the road bends. It's funny, Bow Street is the road that doesn't bend. It should be called Arrow Street. But on Bow Street, when the street bends, that kind of designates the one moment of change and centering, I think, on your main street. And so we would love to see, and we will propose an outcome like this in this location. They've even kept an extra lane here that may or may not be necessary. My point isn't to say that we know which lanes can go away, but just to say that we look for the lanes that can go away. So that's number of lanes. Next is the width of the lanes themselves. Understanding that the typical road to the typical subdivision in America is now wide enough to allow you to experience the curvature of the earth. Because the way the standards have changed, this is a subdivision from the 60s, this is one from the 80s, same height of airplane same size of house, but you can see how the roads got wider and wider. We know that wider lanes cause people to go faster. It's something you know as a driver. We know a 12-foot lane is a highway lane. We know a 10-foot lane is an urban lane. NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, which are the urban or town, city or town equivalent of AASHTO, say 10 feet is an appropriate standard. Most DOTs require 11. 11 is not the end of the world. Maine DOT will allow 10 in certain circumstances. And what I find interesting on your main streets is that actually providing the changes that we want to see, there are some streets which just have a width where you need to have 10-foot lanes, or you can't fit in that extra thing. You can't fit in the biking, you can't fit in the parking. Here the streets are wide enough where I think this 10 to 11 discussion doesn't necessarily need to happen. But certainly 11-foot or narrower, 10-foot is ideal. You can see how a 10-foot lane is big enough. You have a lot of lanes that, because of a number of factors, are 13 feet, 14 feet, 15 feet wide, and those can be put back to 10-foot or 11-foot lanes by putting parking or other things in the roadway. Parallel parking. People say, oh, you're the walkability guy, you must hate parallel parking. I love parallel parking. Parallel parking is an essential barrier of steel that protects the curb from moving vehicles. It makes a curb habitable. This is Fort Lauderdale, famous for happy hour on Himmershey Boulevard. We did a walkability study there a number of years ago. The study got the parking back on the outbound side, which was outlawed so people could rush out of town instead of enjoying happy hour. This is happy hour on the parked side of the street. This is happy hour on the unparked side of the street. No one wants to hang out, sit, drink, stand, or walk, 3 feet away from cars going 40 miles an hour. So you have a lot of spots we've discovered where parking was eliminated to allow the traffic to flow more smoothly. And guess what? The traffic does flow more smoothly, and people like that. But we always face the fundamental question, do you want to be a place that's easy to get through or a place that's worth arriving at? And you have to pick your point on that spectrum, and certainly parallel parking is a benefit that doesn't push you too far into the congestion category. So we notice a lot of spaces that maybe used to be loading zones that might be a bus stop, but this is not, that you do not have 150-foot long buses, that could be rededicated to parallel parking. Lots of no parking spots we noticed. Of course, if you can replace parking with a parklet with dining in it, go right ahead. Notice the Jersey barrier is what makes this work, right? If you have a Jersey barrier, you can sit up against the travel lanes. And then again, because we were here today, they striped 4 new parking spots during the day. So they didn't even know what I was going to be talking about. And then, of course, the other part of this picture are street trees. Street trees are, were once considered a problem by street engineers. They were called FHOs, fixed hazardous objects. And in fact, people felt they made streets more dangerous until the studies came out of Florida showing that a street with street trees is safer than a street without street trees because they slow cars down, sometimes dramatically. But better to hit a street tree than to hit a pedestrian. And when you line up the street trees, of course, you get that wall between you and the traffic. We have wires here. They can get in the way of street trees, but they're rarely on both sides of the street. If there is a rebuild, the rebuild should include street trees. You don't have that. You don't have many street trees now. If you care about climate, if you care about heat islands in the summer, if you care about the current loss of wildlife because the critters have nothing to eat, street trees are really important. This is what a street feels like without the street trees, right? Without the parallel parking. I was looking for an equivalent here in Freeport. I found just one, but at least it's a low-speed street. That guy, look at, he didn't want to walk in the street. He's on that sidewalk. Traffic signals. We are over-signaled in America. And the only reason I say that is that the data are very clear saying that signals are dangerous when you can have an always stop sign. This is the classic study done in Philadelphia. They changed the rules, and actually they had to take out 472 signals. Almost all of them were replaced by all-way stop signs at the intersections. Crashes went down by 24%, and severe pedestrian injury crashes went down by more than 2/3. Why? Well, traffic engineers in Philadelphia believe that it's a local habit to speed up to beat the red, just in Philadelphia. That is a factor, but if you just think about it. It took me a while to think about this, and then it was obvious that at an all-way stop sign, only the most flagrant scofflaw is going to go through that thing at more than 5 miles an hour, right? But at a signalized intersection, half the people all the time are going through it 20, 30 miles an hour. So it's just a much more dangerous condition. This is the good city, right, in America. The biker's going the wrong way, the wheelchair user's comfortable. That's what happens at an all-way stop intersection. This was our plan for Albuquerque, where we identified where the smaller streets were meeting the medium streets and vice versa. And we identified 17 locations where they could remove signals. And they removed 9 of them. The signals got bagged. Then there was a rebellion, and the stop signs got bagged because people hate change. Then there was a counter-revolution, and they bagged the signals again and brought the stop signs back. And this is what's fascinating. City reinstalls downtown stop signs to reduce traffic pileup and speeding. And what they learned, which is not what I knew, but when I did this, was that you get through a downtown faster stopping at every intersection than you do sitting, waiting at lights. And so actually cities and towns can not have a traffic problem. And the idea that we could have more, that we could replace some of your signals, perhaps, we have to do the counts, it's very clear, there are warrants and there are rules, but we have to do the counts, and maybe we can find a spot like at West Street where this signal could be a stop sign. But there's also some other spots, like where Bow meets Main, that if that was an all-way stop, it would just cause a little pause as people come through town. It wouldn't, we have to look at the counts again. It would also allow you to get rid of lanes. Because at an all-way stop, you don't need left turn lanes. Everyone just takes their turn. So that's fascinating to us. When you remove the center line from a street, and this points to the whole Vision Zero idea of making drivers feel uncomfortable, when you remove the center line from a street, people go 7 miles an hour slower, right? Crazy. But the fact that the 2 yellow lines make you know that no one's going to hit you is why, some of the nicest main streets in Maine are without center lines. And here, I'm not challenging the DOT. We're all in this together. They have certain rules they have to follow. Where's Matt? They have certain rules they have to follow. But I wanted to raise it so we can at least try. If you're getting federally funded, you have to keep the center line. But you can paint it with house paint, and it just fades out, goes away. Curb radius. When you cross a 20-foot street, is it 20 feet or is it 40 feet? Because is your radius of curvature 2 feet or is it 40 feet, right? And you can see that the lean of this red truck, that you don't have to slow down to go around that corner. You've got some really big ones on your main street, and you get further south and you've got some enormous ones on where Pine meets Main. It's actually 95 feet to cross a 2-lane street. And it's because of this curve. It's because of the curve and getting around that corner. I know my laser is barely visible, but it's about getting around that corner. But of course, the whole thing could be better L-shaped, and you could narrow it up. Here's Jason just out of his mind. It's 95 feet. Cycling. Now, we need to talk about the challenges that cyclists face here in Freeport and elsewhere. The idea of the sharrows, you have lots of sharrows on your main street. We know that sharrows actually don't make streets safer. That study came out. When that study came out, I went to my Twitter and I said, we need a new sharrow symbol now that we know that sharrows don't really help. And someone suggested this one. But the winner was Queen Anne Greenways with the Prero. Please don't hit me. Oh, God. This is on Main Street. This is a beautiful slide. I'm going to be using this all over. On a wide street like this, what they say is that if you're going to generate a cycling population, which every city wants to do, you have to have a somewhat comprehensive low-stress bike system. And the low stress is key because, forgive me, the statistics show that the women and children will not bike unless it's a low-stress system, and most of the men also. So how do you achieve that? Well, you know, we were out there today. Again, the stripers are out. It's spring and they're out. But you know, the beginning is to have the buffer, maybe some sort of vertical separation. But the real way to handle it to the south is what you have already planned, which is the mixed use, the shared use path, the SUP, the shared use path that's 10 feet wide and out of the street. Because you know we're down here south by Pine Street where the interchange is, and it's very heavy, fast traffic. And the plan is to take what I just showed you, crosses the street here, and then becomes this raccoon trail through the dirt. But the plan is to make that continuous all the way to where Main Street becomes, where I can show you here in your active living plan. By street plans, Mike Lydon, a dear friend and co-author of mine, very good planner, I hope some of you met him. But if you look at the bikeways that are planned, you can see the purple area is the more downtown area. The green area, which gets the out-of-street path, is the higher speed area. Then in the downtown, we all, I think, want to create a Main Street that is truly lively, which means the bikes and cars can mix. There's a place for that, and it would be right in the heart of your downtown. The purple area is the mixing area. There's already some mixing, maybe not. This is today. You know, because the street does not feel safe yet, the cyclists are on the sidewalk. But we think that will change when the street gets safer. But nobody bikes in the winter. This graph from the hottest state to the coldest state, and you're there, I guess, Maine. Hottest state to the coldest state, the line that bounces around with no relationship to climate whatsoever is bike use, because it's principally infrastructure that determines who cycles. So, you know, climate matters. Certain times of year you may not want to bike, you know, but there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad gear. And certainly, you know, for the majority of the year, we could have a good biking population. Okay, I know I'm only half done, but the last two categories are very quick, so we're getting near the end. The comfortable walk and the interesting walk. The comfortable walk is maybe the most counterintuitive of the topics because we all love, like, you know, climbing Mount Katahdin and getting the big distant view. But actually, the evolutionary biologists tell us that all animals, including humans, we're simultaneously seeking prospect, but also refuge. Prospect means you can see your predators before they attack you, but refuge means your flanks are covered. The best places perhaps have both prospect and refuge. A plaza, this one's in Croatia, Split. I just got there. There's an old slide. I just got there 2 years ago. It's as good as it looks. You know, a plaza is only as good as its walls. A street is only as good as its edges in terms of creating spatial definition. And I like to say you can't have a place unless you have a space. And you can't have a space unless you have good edges that make you feel like you're in an outdoor living room. We've been talking about it for a long time. You know, 1-to-1 was the Renaissance ideal. 3-to-1 can be cool. Beyond 6-to-1, which is not so different from parts of your Main Street. You do better. You're closer to 4-to-1 in the best spots. But beyond 6-to-1, you don't really feel contained anymore. So you're less comfortable in the space. You know, 1-to-6, Salzburg, about as far north as we are here, can be perfectly delightful. No one's doing shadow studies in Salzburg. The opposite of Salzburg, of course, is Houston. This is an old picture of Houston, but I still show it to remind us that it's the surface parking lot that's the principal villain in this conversation of space, making space. Putting chairs in it isn't going to solve the problem. You know, this is not Europe, this is Europe. Look at that outdoor living room. This is in Madrid. Look at that outdoor living room. The idea that buildings shape space. It's figural space. The buildings take any which form so that the spaces have form, as opposed to modernist planning in which the buildings are figural and the space is residual. But we want figural space. We want to feel enclosed in the spaces we're in. And of course, the skinnier you make a street, the more the property is worth. Right? The less you invest in road width, the more your properties are worth. So, you know, when I spoke at MMA, I was showing some of my favorite main streets in Maine, my favorite main streets, like in Bar Harbor, in Portland. And you see these all share this quality of this good street edge, holding the space, making it an outdoor living room, around the state. You did a little better. Like many cities, you tore down some of your taller buildings. I understand there's a bit of a consensus that we can get a bit taller again, because that's what we were here historically. But you still have some pretty good sections, right, where you have taller buildings on both sides. This might be just 2 to 1. It's not that wide. So the better parts of your Main Street feel like this, and of course the worst parts are where the buildings are allowed to get behind the parking lot. It's that simple. Never put a parking lot in front. Here's what a good part of the Main Street looks like, and here's what the bad part looks like, with the parking lots up against the edge and the buildings back. And there's the rule in your comprehensive plan, the last one, that says avoidance of strip development. And strip development probably means something different to you than what it means to me, but I define it as the parking lots are in front. And that's really to be comfortable in a space, that's the first thing to avoid. Then finally, and by the way, you have codes now, and you've done a great job on your Main Street. By the way, I haven't been back here in decades, and back to Freeport, and it looks a lot better than it did last time I was here, and I presume you have rules in place that are not allowing this already, but we want to make sure. Finally, after the comfortable walk, we have the last category, the interesting walk. We humans are among the social primates. Nothing interests us more than other humans. If we don't see signs of humans around, we just stop walking. We want to go back home. I talked about how 1-to-1 was the Renaissance ideal shape. This is 1-to-1. This is in Grand Rapids, which is a pretty walkable downtown, but no one really wants to walk on this street, which connects the 2 best hotels, because when one side of the street is an exposed parking deck and the other side is a conference facility, apparently designed in admiration for the parking deck, it's boring. No one wants boring, long facades, repetition. Mayor Riley in Charleston, mayor for 40 years, taught us it only takes 20 feet of building to hide 200 feet of garage. So if you're building any garages or having any surface parking lots in your downtown, just hide them, as you currently do pretty well. Hide them behind buildings, between them and the street. This one I call the Chia Pet Garage. It's in Miami, where I used to live. Preserve these mid-century storefronts, and they popped up behind. And of course, public art. Blank walls are, I used to work at the NEA, and we funded a lot of public art, and I would always say, let your public art budget be remedial. Use it to remedy urban boredom. And so part of your, I'm sorry these are bleached out a bit, but part of your downtown vision plan are these public art locations. That's an important part of what you're doing. There's already some great stuff happening. Maybe it predated the plan that puts it here, but there you have it. I noticed the coordination with the bush, which was pretty spectacular. And then finally, so have you guys ever met Ed McMahon? He's not the one on Johnny Carson. If he's alive now, he's probably 100. Ed McMahon worked with me for many years at the NEA, and we would bring him to small towns. We used to run a program called Your Town, which helped communities fight sprawl, basically. And he was our star speaker, and he basically would go to them and say, you get the main streets that you demand. And his prime example was Freeport, Maine. And he'd say, look, this is the most beautiful McDonald's in America. Why? Because Freeport made them do it. And actually, McDonald's has 3 models. They've got the model with the parking lot in front. That's what they give you if you don't complain. They've got the model with the, that's closer to the street, but is like, has the PlayStation with purple and orange tubes running through it on your main front. Or they'll do a total custom job if you say that's the only way that you can come to my town. And that's what Freeport did. And I heard that story for all the years before I came and saw it. But that, for me, it represents the sort of pride and chutzpah and ability that this community has to plot a path to an even more walkable and more successful future. So that is the whole talk. I do like to end with some resources, so you buy my books. This is Walkable City, but don't get this version. Get this version with the green stripe, because I added 100 more pages 2 years ago, 10th anniversary edition. For those of you who are doing the work, and Dale here has one, and he gave it to me to sign, this is the book if you're doing the work. Even if you're an activist, it's much more detailed, technical. It's not as inspirational, but it's more useful than the other book. I mentioned this TED Talk. There's another TED Talk more like this one called 4 Ways to Make a City More Walkable. So they're recording tonight. Hello to the camera. But if you have a friend you want to see this show, but they don't want to sit for over an hour, have them watch this 15-minute TED Talk. And then, of course, your wonderful planning history of your new comprehensive plan, your climate action plan, your dog bone work group, and then really high-quality downtown vision plan from Principal Group. And then finally, who's been to Build Maine? I've been there twice. Now I'm too expensive for them, which just shows how much they roll up their shirt sleeves and get it done at whatever budget. But Build Maine is usually a couple-day event every year of talks like this one that are really just fantastic and run by some really wonderful people. You should look into it and try and go next year. It's usually in May or June, I believe. And then finally, we are Speck Dempsey. Our website is speckdempsey.com. All of these resources can be found through our website. We hope you'll go there. Thank you for your attention. And now I think we have a panel.
Nice job, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So who's excited about what this could mean for Freeport? All right. I am too. It's been a fun day, and not just because I got to walk around in a yellow vest and act like an expert. It was a fun day because it became really clear walking down the Main Street corridor with the consulting team today and talking about the background in Freeport, the planning, the downtown vision, the climate action plan, the dog bone work group, and all the work of Complete Streets and Connect Freeport, that there's a really strong consensus in Freeport about where we want to go. And that's really powerful. And I think, what we have now is a team that can really translate all the work that this community's put in into a buildable plan. And with the comprehensive plan coming together, the planning board and the council have endorsed a work plan over the next 8 months. This is a big part of it. We're going to learn more about where we're going with this project here soon. But they've also endorsed work on a funding mechanism that once we have that vision, we'll have the resources to invest in it. And then just as importantly, we all know that we need more housing downtown. We need a diversity of housing around the village area to support the community. And the planning board and staff will be taking on zoning updates that will really allow the community to knit back what the community used to be, which is a lot of vitality downtown with bigger buildings, more folks living downtown and knowing their neighbors. So really exciting. And I'm glad to hear that you're as inspired as I am. So we're going to invite the project team back up now, and we're going to have a little discussion about how we translate this energy into implementation. Thanks again for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it.
Nice job. Nice job.
Thank you.
So we're gonna start with Matt with Maine DOT. Matt, what does it mean to be in a planning partnership on the same side of the table with DOT?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much. The planning partnership or village partnership, sort of one and the same, are really intended to listen to the local desires and to understand what the municipality would like to do, but then also to work with Maine DOT on implementation. I appreciate Jeff saying that this may be the first study you've worked on with Department of Transportation, and it's exciting for us to be here too because we can help shape what's actually possible, but also be able to help you align resources to actually get it built from the beginning and understand some of those community desires.
That's great. So we're going to be able to do some joint fundraising when this vision wraps up and be able to go out and get the dollars to do it together.
That's the hope.
That's exciting. And then there's a lot of talk about sort of slowing down traffic on Main Street, emphasizing placemaking, making it a destination that folks want to linger. How does that translate with sort of traffic throughput on Route 1? And what kind of placemaking flexibility do we have relative to getting cars moving through the corridor?
Sure. Yeah. The Route 1 here, well, I'll say Route 1 across the state means a lot of different things to a lot of different communities. But here in Freeport, you have a unique opportunity that you have 295 right there as well, right? And two interstate exits that sort of buffer or actually meet both parts of your village that need to be connected and are connected. Having that redundancy with 295 allows the state road now to be the single lane that it is as opposed to 2 lanes where it is in many other locations. But also allows some of those additional placemaking flexibilities. the highway corridor priority out here, I'll say, we rank it. And here in Freeport, it's actually relatively low, given that 295 is our priority to move traffic from south to north. And that you probably don't find yourself here accidentally, right? Because if you get off the interstate at exit 20 or 22, depending on the direction you're going, you're meaning to hit a destination there, you're meaning to be here. So stopping at a couple intersections probably isn't that big of a deal for the driver, for the traveler. And those opportunities exist in our design flexibility.
That's great.
You're on film.
Yeah.
So we're partners here, and we have some flexibility to sort of rethink Main Street for slowing traffic down, making it a vibrant place. Jessa and Jason, how are we going to move forward on this and actually make this happen?
Carefully, smartly, hopefully. I mean, I think the biggest thing that is important, and we're excited to be here, is because the town and the DOT are partnering on this. It's not so much that we're going to be adding anything new. It's that you've started that initiative, you've worked with this community, and you've all said we want to make change happen. And our scope is designed to build off of that. So we've pulled together a bunch of plans. One of these boards back there has a scope. I can pull up a slide maybe in a minute, but we're learning from that. But also, we do want to go out and make a executable vision for that. We want to be able to say that, okay, if you all think it could look like this, the Bowen Main intersection, for instance, let's get those numbers. Let's see if that's something that's actually viable, so that when we produce an actual plan, we can say it could work. And we have to look that way across a number of things. It's not just the traffic. We have to look a little bit at the infrastructure and are these things buildable? But I think we also want to still have an opportunity to hear from the community as well. So this fall, I think we're going to have another session, but hopefully a little bit more of a hands-on session where we can talk with folks.
Do you want to walk people through your...
A quick follow-up too to that. I know we've talked a lot about housing around the corridor in the downtown, and I've heard comments, okay, that's great, but what does this mean for congestion? How is this going to affect my commute? How do we think about that and plan for that to get the best without some of the other circumstances that we want to avoid?
One of the most important things that I love to do in a traffic study, and for this we're sort of looking at it sort of at a high level, but a technical high level, which is to prove that when you create basically the magnets of all those different uses, as Jeff showed in his first slides, right next to each other, they more or less attract trips right there. In fact, in the busiest cities where everything is so mixed, there's actually far, far, far more trip making than even 13 trips per household. But they're all just walking trips. They're all right there because that's a great place to walk to. So you get to the right level of magnets, which happen to be housing units, and also places to go, which happen to be shops and restaurants and jobs. And all those things actually literally reduce traffic. And there's lots of data that can support that. And I think that's kind of the thing that is making a place like Newburyport, as used as an example, so successful.
They actually did a study of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, my friend Rick Chelman, who you've worked with. And they applied the ITE, Institute of Traffic Engineers, trip generation rates to Portsmouth and said, okay, based on everything that's in Portsmouth, this is how many car trips you're going to have a day. And then they counted, and it was less than half of that because of the traditional organization of the town and the mixed-use nature of the town.
That's great. That's great. I've watched the folks who came in, and I know that this is an engaged group who's connected to other folks in the community, and I'm sure they're wondering about where we go from here, and what are the next steps, and how do they engage and provide input.
I think you have, if you can advance, I think there's a slide that has our schedule, which is in the back of the room, or maybe not. There's these are, yeah, it's a little zoomed in, so maybe we won't be able to show it. But basically, you might be able to scroll down to it. Basically, there we go. There's our goals. These are good, and we're gonna be spending our initial time figuring out what's right. What's been said, figuring out the right approach. We're gonna then spend some time figuring out what the future might look like. So some of that is, how much development could happen. We want to pressure test that. when you start to add new development, new housing, ideally all of those different magnets, there will be some additional trip making. Hopefully more and more of it is the walkable kind. And we want to be able to test that out and then test it on the actual roadways. Because one of the most important things here is, as Jeff has pointed out, there's a lot of space that we could actually turn into driving space. But actually your goal listed here on the bottom is to actually make public spaces. We don't want the street to necessarily carry more cars. We want this environment to be able to actually carry more space for other things. And so we'll be doing that testing this summer. And we'll hopefully come back to you in the fall with some ideas. Now, our ideas are going to be born from everything we've heard thus far, but we want folks to say, I like this approach to it a little bit more. I'm not so sure about getting rid of that lane, Jeff, how about this lane instead? Or I really, really want more landscaping and trees more than I want parked cars. Or maybe we really do need that on-street parking, Jeff, let's do that stuff. And those are the types of trade-offs we want to have a discussion with the community, obviously with the DOT and with the town staff as well, and be able to come together with sort of a consensus plan in the late fall and the winter, and something that we can package for the beginning of next year. It's a 12-month process.
Yep.
So we have some time, but we have a lot to do.
That's great. That's great. I know, as Matt mentioned, we had a really strong response when we put the request for proposals out. There was a lot of firms that had a lot of skills, a lot of capacity. They understood what we were trying to accomplish, but I'm really glad that there was really strong consensus to pick the Stantec and Spec Dempsey team. Really appreciate you guys being here tonight. Let's give them a round of applause. So they're graciously going to stick around and make themselves available. So stay tuned for project updates through a new email distribution list. Hopefully, if you haven't signed up and given your email on the way out, we've got sign-in sheets. Please fill those out. We'll be in touch with you to keep you up to date on what's happening next. And we're really excited to have you here and to move forward together. So thanks again, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Brett.